After c4, white is playing the English opening, so we're going with e5, and then g2. So the white player will play this thematic moves: knight c3, the bishop in g5, and it will be attacking the square in d5 with multiple pieces and the pawn. So that's what the white player is fighting for. Obviously, the move e5, as you know, stops d4 from coming. So anyway, most moves are going to be transposable. So let's just go on. Knight f6, bishop g2, and now d5. So we allow white to give us the c pawn for the d pawn. We take back. Now we're going through knight f3. So the white player is determined to castle straight away. Now here pushing e4 is wrong, because when white is done moving this knight, the bishop will have an attack on the pawn, and you can't really defend it in any way that makes that much sense. So obviously you need to play knight c6 here. And in the previous videos, in the first video we went through queen to b3 now, and everything that happens next is a disaster. We also went through d4. These are two of the main moves, but there's more main moves to see. Let's look at this one, d3. The idea is to simply being able to develop this bishop anywhere. Okay, bishop e7 comes now, meaning that bishop g5 is no longer an option. Castle. Bishop e6. We don't have to worry about knight g5 attacking this bishop, because we have two pieces attacking the diagonal. Okay, knight to c3. Castle. And now let's look at this variation. Queen to b3 is a type of move that I've met a lot of times, and it's always been a real struggle for me to know how to continue, because there's two attacks on d5, and the queen is also attacking the pawn in b7. Okay, well, take this knight. There's a discover attack on the queen, so the queen now has to take our knight. Obviously, taking the pawn here doesn't make sense, because you can take this pawn in e2 with check, and you basically won a piece. So in this position, white has to take the knight. Okay, bishop f6 comes now. This is how you play this. Knight threatening e4, which puts an attack on the knight, whilst there's attack on the queen. So the queen will go, let's say, c5. Okay, rook e8, continuing development. Remember, the punishment here is the fact that this bishop can't really go anywhere that makes sense. Rook to d1, putting the rook in the same file of our queen. Bishop e7, kicking away that queen. Queen to b5, putting pressure on this pawn. e4 comes now, obviously, because this pawn in d3 is pinned. And now a move like knight e5, just moving away and putting double attack on this pawn, loses to knight to d4. You're attacking the queen, you're attacking this pawn, threatening, obviously, to go with check, and it's easy life from there. Okay, let's make an example. Let's say the queen has to get out of the attack of the knight. Queen b7, queen d6 comes now, and there's an attack on the knight. The knight can't move anywhere. The knight is completely trapped, unless you might say, okay, what about knight to c4? But then you can take it. When the pawn takes you back, knight e2 check, the queen has discovered an attack on that rook. So the queen will have to go back from b7 and take the pawn in e4. But now you can attack it again, f5. The queen will have to move, and then we will take the knight. What if the queen goes to e3? Well, obviously f4 is not possible, because knight e2 wins the queen. So what if queen e3? Okay, knight to c2, and we're achieving this fork. So the queen will have to move, queen to f4, still defending the knight in e5. And now we take this rook. That's the best move. We have just given our rook in a8. There's an attack from the bishop. However, we're winning. Now, how is that? So, first of all, white's best move is knight to c4. Attacking the queen. Black's best is to swap queens. Queen takes queen. Bishop takes back. And now the knight goes back to c2. And when the bishop is finally done taking our rook, and then we take back, position evaluated -2. We're down 2 pawns, but we're up a piece, and this is a better endgame for black. White might play bishop c7, and after bishop f6, we're gonna close the line here, because we're going a little bit too far. Black is playing the endgame with an extra piece. So let's take it from the start. So g2, knight f6, and then the bishop goes in fianchetto, d5, take, knight f3, knight c6. Okay, d3 is what we're looking at. Bishop e7 stops bishop g5 from coming. Castle, bishop e6, knight to c3, castle. And we're looking at the variation with queen to b3 now. Now here you might be wondering, if instead of queen to b3, which is what we're looking at, what if e4? Now this is a positional concession. This is a backward pawn now, so that's not good for white to play like that. Black will play knight d to b4, and now there's double attack on this pawn. So white will have to defend it, and the only way to do it is through knight to e1. So it's getting very passive. Okay, black goes on with knight to d4 now. It's putting a lot of pressure on the square c2, but it's well defended at the moment, so we can't do anything with that. A move like a3, attacking the knight now, white will want to kick our knights away. Is punished with bishop to b3, and that puts now enough attack on the square c2. The queen is trapped. The only move available here will be queen d2. Obviously you can't block because you got two attackers. So after queen to d2, only move, knight b goes to c2. This is the best to attacking the rook. So after knight takes and knight takes, rook to b1, queen to d7 is the best move. And the idea is to simply play rook f to d8 and c6 to stop the knight going to d5 and capitalize on this pawn. So if black was to move again now, it would be c6. This would be the best move just to stop knight d5. And then you will play rook f to d8 and you will go for that pawn. So we've seen enough. I mean, this e4 here is not a good move. As you know, at this point e4 you can just play here. There's this weakness, knight e1, knight to d4. Maybe a3 you might argue, okay, what if white doesn't play a3 and he plays anything else? Well, like what? Like bishop e3 maybe? Getting rid of one of the two knights? That's fine. Black plays a5. And after bishop takes our knight, we take back with the pawn. It comes with an attack on the knight. Now obviously a3 doesn't work because he will just take the knight. And like you see, you will take the knight. They take your knight, but then you take this pawn, start attacking the rook. Rook to b1, and now a4. And we have a passed pawn. The pawn being taken, but then a3, and you see these two bishops here are going to be protecting that pawn. Position evaluated -5. So in this position, earlier we saw bishop takes knight, pawn takes back, and a3 is not working. So knight to e2 now, putting pressure on this pawn, preparing maybe knight to f4. But now you can just play bishop to a2, take this pawn, and you know you're up a pawn. The bishop is going to retreat. It cannot be trapped. This move b3 doesn't work because you will just play a4, and black is better. So in this position, let's keep looking at queen to b3. As we mentioned before already, knight takes knight, queen takes back. Bishop f6, threatening e4. Queen to c5, moving away. Rook e8. Rook to d1. Bishop to e7, kicking the queen away. Queen to b5. e4. So earlier, we went through knight to e5 and see how knight to d4 capitalizes. Let's also mention that knight to d2 loses to the same thing. That there's this attack on the queen and the attack on the square e2. So what if instead our opponent plays, after e4, our opponent plays knight to e1. Now the bishop is attacking the square. Okay, knight to d4 comes, queen takes in b7, knight takes check, king f1. You might be wondering, the king will be attacking the knight from there. This is the best move. Obviously take the bishop. It's the only thing we could have done at this point. Rook takes back, rook on an open file, threatening to go to c7. White doesn't look like he's that bad, but in reality we're completely winning. Bishop to g4 attacks the rook. A move like rook to d2 obviously loses to bishop to g5. f4 is not possible because you can take en passant. So what if instead our opponent plays f3? This seems to be making sense. Take the pawn. Again, knight takes in f3 doesn't work because of bishop to g5. And you're winning the exchange. So what if white takes with the bishop? Okay, check. And now the king can't go on a dark diagonal without running into the deadly bishop and queen attackers on the dark squares. So after bishop blocking in g2, bishop to g5 comes with an attack on the rook. Crazy enough, allowing rook to c7, but obviously there's this move now, rook to b8, attacking the queen. The queen will have to move, well, move and also defend the rook in c7. Queen to a7, but now bishop to e3 will do the job. Also because if the queen moves to the only square where she can still keep protecting this rook, the bishop can also go to b6, for instance, and make a fork. Obviously, here I need to point something out, the fact that this is very transposable opening, because there's not really like a big fight for the center except d5, but then take, we've given white what he wanted. But because it's a very passive opening, the moves order will change, so you just have to remember the positions. After knight f3 and knight c6, we've been going through d3. But sometimes your opponent will just castle. What do you do now? You just keep playing the same moves. So you play bishop e6. And after knight to c3 now, bishop e7. And now white can play d3. So 2 or 3 moves later, it doesn't really matter. The position we've reached is exactly the same. So if white now plays d3, this is a perfect transposition from the line we just saw. What if in this position, and this is the main move and one of the most annoying ones, the fundamental reason why I decided to make this video, because I'm so tired of dealing with it, d4 now, which is the main move. and the strongest move. Okay, take the pawn. And after the knight takes back, now we take this knight. Our opponent is forced to take back with the pawn. The reason is simple. If white does try some weird Zwischenzug, like the knight going in c6, doesn't work because take with the queen. Rook takes back and then you take the exchange. You're up material. So let's take this from the start and let's see this better, because this is the most important one of the most important lines. d5, take, knight f3, knight c6, castle, bishop e6, knight c3, bishop e7. And now, as we said, d3 is a perfect transposition. We've seen it already. d4. Okay, let's look at this. Pawn takes, knight takes. Knight takes in c3. Now white has to take with the pawn. And crazy enough, the best move is to actually take this knight. It's so crazy because our opponent has an isolated pawn, and now we are helping white to reconnect the isolated pawn with the others. This is now a central pawn. White has two central pawns. There's absolutely no weaknesses. White is doing fine. As a matter of fact, this is white's absolute top line. Okay, c6 comes now, obviously, to reduce the influence of the fianchetto bishop. e4. Does this work? The idea is to play d5 and produce a passed pawn. This is met with bishop to c4, very important, attacking the rook. Rook to e1, castle. Remember that there's one reason why we've given away this center to our opponent, and that's because, let's make an example. White plays bishop to e3, developing the bishop and protecting the pawn in d4, allowing the queen maybe to develop or to go anywhere, basically. Black's best move is b5. We have a majority that our opponent doesn't have. We got these two, this pawn and this one, against this one. We got the b pawn and the a pawn against the lonely a pawn, and that's what we're gonna be playing for. What if our opponent does play d5? This doesn't work because of bishop to b4, and we are taking the opponent rook. The only way to stop our tremendous bishops now is through bishop to b2, because the rook couldn't move anywhere. And now bishop to c5. The bishop is now covering the white queen, therefore we're threatening to win a pawn. So what if our opponent takes in c6? Looks like it makes sense. Okay, queen to b6, and you're recapturing that pawn straight away. This now cannot be met with pawn to e5 because the bishop and queen are together attacking f2. This is going to be a fork. So bishop to e3. Okay, rook a to d8, attacking the queen. Queen to c4. Bishop takes bishop. Pawn takes back is really stupid because the pawn will be double up and isolated. No reason to play like that. So rook takes back in e3, and now the queen recaptures this pawn. And now our bishop is pinned. Bishop to f1. Is this a good move by white? Well, okay, rook to d4 protects the bishop more. Okay, rook to c3, increasing the pressure on that bishop. But it's not going anywhere. Rook to d8. We don't care about the fact that white's attacking this bishop multiple times because simply pawn takes back. And white player cannot really recapture that pawn. Yes, we have isolated our pawn, but it's a passed pawn. And this is the absolute best that the white player can do with this opening. It's supposed to be, it's like -1 something, so it's slightly better for black. But this is the absolute top engine moves for the white player.